The Ghost of Tokyo in the Ruins of Macedonia. Chapter 1, The Silence of 5:17 a.m. Welcome to Synapse Daily. July 26, 1963. A date etched into the stone of history. Most of the residents in Skopje, the capital of the Socialist Republic of Macedonia, were in a deep sleep. The air was thick with the humid warmth of a Balkan summer. Then, at exactly 5:17 a.m., the world didn't just shake, it ruptured. For 17 agonizing seconds, the earth beneath the Vardar River Valley groaned with the force of a 6.1 magnitude earthquake. This wasn't just a tremor, it was a tectonic execution. In those 17 seconds, 80% of the city was leveled. Imagine the sound: a deafening roar of masonry collapsing, glass shattering, and the haunting silence of a city losing its breath. When the dust finally settled, over 1,000 people were dead, and 200,000 were homeless. The iconic old railway station, once a symbol of the city's connection to the world, saw its clock freeze forever at 5:17. But the tragedy wasn't just in the rubble. It was in the loss of identity. Skopje was a city of layers: Ottoman, neoclassical, and local Balkan architecture. All of it was turned into a white, choking dust. As the sun rose that morning, it didn't shine on a city, it shone on a graveyard of memories. However, this destruction created a paradoxical opportunity. In the brutal logic of urban planning, Skopje had become a tabula rasa, a blank slate. The world looked at the ruins and saw a chance to build the city of the future. But who would have the courage to design a city from zero? The answer lay thousands of miles to the east, in the mind of a man who had spent his life thinking about how cities could breathe, grow, and survive the apocalypse. Chapter 2, The Laboratory of International Solidarity. The aftermath of the Skopje earthquake triggered something rare in the 1960s, a crack in the Iron Curtain. In a world divided by the Cold War, Yugoslavia occupied a unique space. Under Josip Broz Tito, it was socialist but non-aligned, a bridge between the American West and the Soviet East. Tito realized that the reconstruction of Skopje shouldn't just be a local effort, it should be a global manifesto. He invited the United Nations to lead the charge. This was the birth of what historians call the Laboratory of Solidarity. Soldiers from the United States and the Soviet Union, who were pointing nuclear missiles at each other elsewhere, were suddenly side by side in Skopje, clearing debris. The UN launched an international competition in 1964 to find a master planner for the city center. This was the first time the UN had ever taken such a lead in urban design. 8 world-class teams were invited, 4 from Yugoslavia and 4 from the international stage. Among them was Kenzo Tange. At that time, Tange was already an architectural titan. He had designed the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, turning a site of nuclear horror into a space of quiet contemplation. More importantly, Tange came from Japan, a nation that shared Macedonia's tragic relationship with seismic instability. Tange didn't just bring blueprints, he brought a philosophy. He argued that Skopje should not be restored to its medieval past. Instead, it should be propelled into the space age. His victory in the competition was a turning point. It signaled that the new Skopje would not be a city of bricks and nostalgia, but a city of concrete and cybernetic systems. Chapter 3, The Ghost of Tokyo Bay and the Metabolist Manifesto. To understand why Tange's plan for Skopje was so radical, we have to look back at the ghost we discussed in our previous episode, the 1960 Tokyo Bay Plan. If you haven't seen that video, Tange had proposed a linear city built on the water, a massive concrete spine that would allow Tokyo to grow like an organic cell. In Tokyo, the plan failed because of economics and the salt and steel problem. But in the ruins of Skopje, Tange saw a second chance. Tange was the leader of the Metabolist movement. In biology, metabolism is the process that keeps an organism alive by replacing old cells with new ones. Tange believed cities should work exactly the same way. He argued that modern urban planning was failing because it treated cities as static monuments. He believed a city should be a living, breathing machine that could adapt to the passage of time. In Skopje, Tange applied his spine and cell theory with ruthless precision. He saw the Vardar River not as a barrier, but as the lifeblood of the city. He wanted to replace the old radial city where everything converges on a single, congested center with a linear system. he proposed a massive axis of movement and communication. He wanted to build a city where the infrastructure, the spine, was permanent and massive, while the living spaces, the cells, could be updated or changed as society evolved. This wasn't just architecture, it was an attempt to encode human evolution into concrete. He was moving away from the machine for living and toward the organism for living. Chapter 4: The Fortress of Life, the City Wall. The most visible and controversial part of Tange's master plan is the city wall, Gradski Zid. If you look at Skopje from above today, you see a horseshoe-shaped ring of massive, high-density residential blocks encircling the city center. This was Tange's answer to the trauma of 1963. He believed that after the earthquake, the citizens of Skopje needed to feel a sense of enclosure and protection. The city wall was designed to be a literal shield. These were not just apartment buildings, they were modular skyscrapers built of beton brute raw, unpainted concrete. Tange chose this material because it was honest, strong, and emphasized the structural reality of the building. The wall was meant to define the inner city from the outer city, creating a clear hierarchy of space. But there was a technical genius behind the aesthetics. The blocks were positioned to act as windbreaks against the harsh Balkan winds and were engineered with seismic joints that allowed the massive structures to sway rather than snap during a tremor. Inside these concrete giants, Tange designed modular apartments with flexible floor plans. He envisioned a future where a family could buy a cell and expand it by plugging in new modules. Walking past the city wall today, the sheer scale is intimidating. It feels like a futuristic fortress from a 1970s sci-fi film. For Tange, the city wall wasn't just a place to live, it was a psychological monument to human resilience, a promise made in concrete that the earth would never take the city again. Chapter 5: The City Gate, the Cybernetic Nerve Center. If the city wall was the shield, the city gate, Gradska Porta, was the brain. In Tange's Metabolist vision, a city should function like a biological nervous system. He hated the traditional radial city where all roads converge on a single, suffocating center. In Tokyo, he tried to break this with a linear spine over the bay. In Skopje, he finally had the chance to build that spine on land. The city gate was designed as a massive, multi-level transportation and business hub. It wasn't just a railway station, it was an intermodal gateway where trains, buses, and cars would enter the city through specialized valves. Tange envisioned a structure that looked like a series of interlocking concrete vertebrae. The lower levels were dedicated to heavy logistics and automated freight. The middle levels housed high-speed transit arteries. The upper levels were soaring office towers and pedestrian plazas. This was 1960s futurism at its absolute peak. Tange believed that in the late 20th century, the flow of information and the flow of people were identical. The city gate was meant to be the processing unit of the city. He used advanced computer modeling, a rarity at the time, to predict traffic patterns and optimize the flow. Every concrete pillar was placed with surgical precision to ensure that the city could breathe even during peak hours. Walking through the skeleton of the city gate today, you see the remnants of this cybernetic dream. It was an attempt to turn the chaotic movement of a Balkan capital into the smooth efficiency of a computer circuit. It was architecture that didn't just house people, it managed them. Chapter 6: The Aesthetics of Grey, Brutalism as a Language of Hope. To many modern eyes, the concrete landscapes of Skopje look oppressive or dull. But to understand the soul of this project, you must look through the eyes of someone in 1970. In the aftermath of the earthquake, grey wasn't the color of gloom, it was the color of stability. This was the era of brutalism, derived from the French term béton brut, raw concrete. Tange and his colleagues, like the legendary Yanko Konstantinov who designed the iconic post office, chose concrete for a very specific reason: honesty. In a socialist society, there was no room for the fake ornaments of the bourgeois past. Concrete was democratic. It was made from the very earth of the Vardar Valley. It was strong, fireproof, and most importantly, earthquake-resistant. But Tange's brutalism was different from the cold, square blocks seen in the Soviet Union. His concrete had skin. He used wooden molds to leave grain patterns on the surface of the buildings, giving the stone a tactile, organic feel. He played with light and shadow like a sculptor. Look at the telecommunications center in Skopje. It looks like a futuristic temple or a spaceship docked in the middle of the city. The jagged edges and sweeping curves were designed to catch the sun at different angles throughout the day. This new monumentality was meant to inspire the citizens. It told them that they were part of a grand, modern experiment. Concrete wasn't just a building material, it was a promise that the city would never crumble into dust again. It was the physical manifestation of human willpower. Chapter 7: The Unfinished Symphony, When Reality Hit the Dream. As we approach 1975, the year the master plan was officially completed, we begin to see the cracks, not in the concrete, but in the dream itself. Why is the Skopje we see today only a partial shadow of Tange's original drawings? The answer is a painful lesson in geopolitics and economics. The early 1970s brought the global oil crisis, which sent shockwaves through the Yugoslav economy. Tange's metabolism required immense resources. The specialized steel needed for seismic joints and the custom-made molds for the city gates vertebrae were becoming prohibitively expensive. As the Yugoslav state struggled with rising debt, the Great Leap Forward in Skopje began to slow down. Politics also played a role. Tange was a visionary, but he was also an outsider. Local architects and planners began to push back against his totalitarian precision. They argued that Tange's plan was too rigid and didn't leave enough room for the organic, messy reality of Balkan life. By the mid-70s, the massive spine of the city gate was cut short. The grand railway station was built, but the surrounding office towers and logistics hubs remained as sketches on a drafting table. The city wall was completed, but the vibrant commercial plazas Tange envisioned at its base were never fully realized. Skopje became an unfinished symphony. It was a city caught between a glorious futuristic vision and the harsh limitations of the late 20th century. It stands today as a monument to the moment when human ambition finally hit the ceiling of physical reality. Chapter 8: The Human Scale, Life Inside the Machine. How did it feel to live in Tange's city of the future? This is where the story gets deeply personal. Imagine being a family that lost everything in the 1963 earthquake. You spent years living in tent cities or temporary wooden barracks provided by international aid. Then, in the early 70s, you are handed the keys to an apartment in the Gradski Zid, the city wall. Inside, the experience was revolutionary. Tange's apartments were designed with a Japanese sense of space. They were modular and efficient. Many featured movable partitions, allowing residents to change the layout of their homes as their families grew. The large windows offered panoramic views of the Vardar River and the rising concrete skyline. For the first time, the people of Skopje had central heating, modern elevators, and a sense of vertical living. But there was a psychological trade-off. The old Skopje was a city of mahallas, neighborhoods where people lived in small houses with courtyards, where life happened on the street level. Tange's plan moved life into the sky. The massive concrete plazas between the buildings often felt windswept and empty. While the city wall provided safety and modern luxury, some residents felt a sense of concrete isolation. This tension between the monumental scale of the architect and the human scale of the resident is the core of Skopje's identity. The city became a place of high-speed transit and massive structures, yet the people still tried to recreate their old warmth in the shadows of the grey giants. It was a collision between the 21st century dream and the ancient Balkan soul. Chapter 9: The Post-Tito Vacuum, A City in Stasis. By the late 1980s, the political landscape that birthed the concrete phoenix began to crumble. With the death of Josip Broz Tito, the glue holding Yugoslavia together started to dissolve. Skopje's master plan, which relied on a strong central vision and massive state funding, found itself in a vacuum. The grand vision of Kenzo Tange was left half-finished, like a sprawling sci-fi movie set where the cameras had suddenly stopped rolling. The city gate stood as a magnificent but isolated fragment. The planned secondary office towers were never built, leaving the main station looking like a giant monument in a field of undeveloped land. Maintenance of the beton brute structures began to decline. In the humid Balkan climate, the raw concrete started to weep, streaked with dark marks from rain and pollution. Critics who always hated the brutalist aesthetic began to call it a grey nightmare. But they missed the point. The city wasn't failing because of the architecture, it was failing because the society that commissioned it was undergoing a painful transition toward capitalism and ethnic nationalism. Tange's dream of a universal, international city was being replaced by a desperate search for local, historical roots. Chapter 10, Skopje 2014, The Great Architectural Erasure. This is perhaps the most controversial chapter in urban history. In 2010, a new government launched Skopje 2014. Their goal was to rewrite the city's identity. They felt that Tange's brutalism was too socialist and not Macedonian enough. Their solution? To wrap Tange's honest concrete in a layer of fake history. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars building neoclassical facades over modernist masterpieces. They erected over 100 bronze statues, including a massive Alexander the Great. They covered the sleek, rational lines of the telecommunications center with gilded ornaments. It was architectural plastic surgery. International critics called it the kitsch capital of Europe. But beneath the fake marble and the styrofoam columns, Tange's concrete bones remained. This period marked a violent rejection of modernism. It was an attempt to hide the future under a fake past. For those who loved Tange's vision, it was like watching a masterpiece being painted over by a child with a crayon. Chapter 11, The Global Resonance, Tange's Ghost in the 21st Century. While the local government tried to hide Tange's work, the rest of the world was rediscovering it. In the last decade, there has been a massive global resurgence in the appreciation of brutalism. Architects from London to Tokyo are looking at Skopje as a holy grail of urban planning. Why? Because Tange's ideas about metabolism, flexible, modular, and resilient cities are exactly what we need in the age of climate change and rapid urbanization. Today, the city wall is being studied by experts in seismic resilience. The city gate is being re-evaluated as a precursor to the smart city logistics we see in places like Singapore or NOM. Tange's ghost is everywhere. When we talk about floating cities to combat rising sea levels, we are using the notes Tange wrote in 1960 and 1965. The world has finally caught up to the man who was too fast for the 20th century. Skopje is no longer just a Macedonian city, it is a global monument to the idea that architecture can be a tool for human survival. Chapter 12, The Concrete Soul, Why It Still Matters. As we walk through Skopje today, past the fake statues and toward the massive, raw concrete ribs of the post office or the railway station, we feel something powerful. There is an honesty in Tange's work that the new facades cannot touch. Concrete doesn't lie. It shows its weight, its strength, and its age. Tange's Skopje reminds us that a city's soul isn't found in decorative ornaments or political statues. It is found in the resilience of its people. The concrete phoenix was built for a population that had seen their world collapse in 17 seconds. It was built to give them a ground that wouldn't shake and a roof that wouldn't fall. Even in its unfinished and massed state, the master plan of 1975 remains the most successful example of international cooperation in history. It proved that in the face of total destruction, humanity can set aside its borders and build a cathedral of reason. Chapter 13, Synapse Daily, The Blueprint for Tomorrow. Welcome to the final thoughts of Synapse Daily. We started this journey with the ghost of Tokyo Bay and ended in the concrete heart of the Balkans. Kenzo Tange's 1975 Skopje master plan wasn't a failure, it was a message in a bottle. It tells us that the greatest cities are not built of stone, glass, or steel. They are built of the courage to imagine the impossible. Whether it's a city on the water or a fortress against earthquakes, Tange taught us that we must stop treating the earth as a static platform and start treating our cities as living, breathing extensions of ourselves. The next time you see a gray concrete building, don't just see a wall. See a shield. See a dream. See a phoenix that refused to stay in the ashes. Like this video if you learned something new. Comment your thoughts below and subscribe for more fascinating stories. What city should we investigate next? The future is waiting to be unboxed. This was Synapse Daily. Stay curious.